In the chilly mist of an 1850 morning, the day began early. The small kitchen was dimly lit by a single candle, casting wavering shadows across worn wooden tables and walls stained by smoke from countless meals. In the corner stood a pot simmering gently on the iron stove, releasing a thin, unappetizing aroma that hung in the air. Breakfast wasn't a delightful affair, rather a routine necessity. The cold stone floor underfoot reminded everyone of simpler, harsher times, absent of today's comforts. The family slowly gathered around the table, each wooden stool creaking beneath their weight. The first dish placed before them was a bowl of pale, watery, gruel-thin oats boiled with water and a scarce pinch of salt. Kita Stiltrin frowned, eyes still heavy with sleep, wishing secretly for something sweeter, richer. Kita, but sweetness was a rarity. The mother stirred the porridge quietly, her face lined with fatigue, but unwaveringly determined, silently urging her family to eat without complaint. Gruel was more than a meal. It symbolized survival. No eggs sizzled in the pan. No bacon crackled. Temptingly, oats thinned with water or, on lucky days, diluted milk. As they spooned their food in silence, each bite was bland, grainy, and gritty, scraping against the roof of their mouths. Yet no one voiced dissatisfaction, aware of how fortunate they were compared to others who faced hunger constantly. Gruel was unpleasant, yet nourishing, enough to carry them through the strenuous hours ahead. The fireplace, now reduced to glowing embers, provided little warmth against the morning chill. The children's breath misted visibly as they ate, wrapped in worn shawls and patched clothing, reminders of ongoing hardship. The faint light creeping through narrow windows signaled dawn breaking fully, bringing the noise of horses clattering past on cobblestones outside. Their breakfast, finished quickly, marked the start of another laborious day, sustained only by humble oats. As the mother cleared bowls and spoons, the father's gaze drifted outside, contemplating another day's toil. He was no stranger to hunger, to hardship, to meals lacking joy. But he took solace in knowing his family at least had food on their table, simple as it was. The children rose from their seats reluctantly, their stomachs barely satisfied, knowing it would be many hours before another meal would break their labors. Such was life in 1850, a perpetual cycle of plain meals and relentless work. Breakfast concluded, the kitchen fell silent again, awaiting their return at midday. Hunger would soon gnaw again, but for now, they had enough strength to face the day. The lingering taste of watery oats remained on tongues, gritty and unsatisfying, a persistent reminder of the daily battle they fought against poverty. Life was tough, food was tougher. Hope lingered faintly in hearts, still believing better days might someday come. By midday, stomachs growled loudly, reminding workers in the bustling factory of their urgent hunger. Machinery rumbled noisily, belching smoke and filling the air with acrid fumes. The factory hands, their faces streaked with soot, looked forward to their brief meal break with desperate eagerness. They clustered together in a courtyard, sitting upon crates and broken chairs, anticipating whatever modest sustenance they had carried from home. Each meal was small, often stale bread or cold potatoes wrapped hastily in cloth, amid the din of clanging metal and shouts of foremen. The workers unwrapped their humble lunches. Their meals rarely contained meat, a luxury most couldn't afford. When present, meat was tough, stringy, and difficult to chew. Its true origin was often unknown, giving rise to whispered jokes and rumors, dubbed mystery meat. These questionable portions were sometimes all that separated a man from a day of complete hunger. Each cautious bite brought uncertainty, mixed with necessity, the harsh truth of sustenance without pleasure. For many, bread was a staple dry course and often speckled with grit or stones from poorly milled flour. Workers chewed carefully, wary of broken teeth or injury, knowing even such bread was scarce. Potatoes, boiled plainly or roasted until leathery, were another staple. Bland and starchy potatoes provided vital calories, but little enjoyment. Meals were about survival, nothing more. No spices or sauces brightened these brief respites. Flavor was a distant luxury reserved for the privileged few. Conversations among the workers were subdued and weary. Occasionally, laughter erupted from jokes about their fine dining. Humor was their coping mechanism, a thin veil over a deeper resignation. Their meals might have lacked taste and variety, but camaraderie and shared hardship provided comfort. Together, they endured hunger, doubt, and fatigue, bonded tightly by mutual struggle and dreams of someday affording better meals. Food, despite its roughness, unified them, reminding everyone they were not alone in hardship. When the break ended, workers quickly gathered their sparse remains and returned dutifully to machines and looms. The short meal left them far from satisfied, stomachs still hollow, energy barely replenished. They moved sluggishly, steeling themselves against the remaining hours. Lunch had been brief, unfulfilling, yet enough to keep them going, a stark reflection of their daily life. Each afternoon dragged painfully onward, punctuated only by the lingering taste of mystery meat and dry bread, returning to relentless labor. Minds often wandered to dreams of better food, fresh bread, tender meat, perhaps even sweets once tasted long ago. Such imaginings distracted briefly from exhaustion, momentarily numbing the ache of hunger. But reality returned swiftly, snapping them back to monotonous routine. Their existence remained harsh, defined by meager meals, long days, and endless toil. A testament to resilience in an unforgiving era. Evening fell swiftly, darkness enveloping. Homes scattered along dirt roads. Families gathered again around sparse tables, illuminated weakly by flickering candlelight. Supper was a repetition of hardship, watery broth containing vegetables harvested from sparse gardens, supplemented occasionally by scraps of tough meat or leftovers stretched thinly. The broth steamed faintly in wooden bowls, offering scant warmth against chilling nights. Each spoonful was eaten slowly, prolonging the illusion of abundance. Vegetables, when present, were cooked until nearly unrecognizable. Soft and tasteless, turnips, carrots, cabbage staples, grown easily but rarely flavorful, floated limply in the broth. Bread accompanied the meal, slightly softened in broth to ease consumption. Occasionally, families had cheese hard, pungent, preserved for weeks. Such luxuries were savored sparingly, crumbs divided carefully among eager mouths. Supper was humble, yet families gathered gratefully, their hunger momentarily silenced by what little they had. Conversations around the table revolved around daily hardships, dreams, and aspirations, punctuated by the clinking of spoons against wooden bowls. Parents reminded children of gratitude for even such simple meals, hoping their young ones might someday enjoy better circumstances. The faint aroma of candles mixed with cooking odors, creating an atmosphere both comforting and austere. Meals provided small comforts despite their roughness. Moments of unity amid struggle. After eating, families lingered briefly at tables, reluctant to face nighttime coldness. Leftover broth, if any remained, was carefully saved, reheated tomorrow, or shared with neighbors. Food waste was unimaginable in these lean times. Stomachs, though hardly full, settled quietly, accepting simplicity with resignation born from years of hardship. These meals weren't celebrated, merely accepted. An unquestioned rhythm defining their daily existence. Finally, bowls emptied, families dispersed slowly, preparing beds of straw and thin blankets. Sleep was rarely restful, disturbed often by hunger pangs or the chill seeping through poorly insulated walls. Yet each night, Hope persisted that tomorrow might be slightly easier, the next meal slightly better. Eating in 1850 remained defined by gritty textures, minimal nourishment, and uncertainty, but beneath such struggle lay unyielding strength, quiet endurance, and a deep-rooted belief in eventual improvement. Eating in 1850 wasn't enjoyable or indulgent. It was a test of resilience. Yet families persisted, surviving, hoping, believing that someday gruel might yield to sweeter fare, mystery meat to something known, grit replaced by true nourishment. Till then, meals were quiet rituals of endurance, sustenance found in gratitude, and the strength of familial bonds forged through hardship. Market day in 1850 was both a hopeful and challenging experience. Families awoke earlier than usual, wrapping themselves in layers of worn cloth to brave the crisp morning air. Streets filled rapidly with carts loaded with produce, livestock, and an array of goods of varying freshness. The scent of animals mingled sharply with the faint sweetness of ripe fruit and vegetables, masking somewhat the persistent odors of dirt and decay. Each stall promised a fleeting chance at slightly better meals, an opportunity no family could ignore. Shoppers wandered carefully, inspecting produce meticulously, well aware vendors sometimes sold items already spoiling. Fruits, though tempting, were often bruised or slightly rotten beneath bright exteriors. Vegetables frequently showed signs of wilt, hidden cleverly beneath fresher-looking leaves. Meat presented the biggest gamble, often displayed openly, attracting flies in warm weather. Buyers, cautious yet hungry, debated silently if potential sickness was worth risking for a rare taste of protein, accepting such dilemmas as common struggles of their harsh reality. The marketplace echoed with lively bargaining, each penny fiercely guarded. Families counted coins slowly, painfully aware each spent penny meant less for tomorrow's bread or broth. Meat vendors shouted loudly, advertising questionable cuts, calling out enticingly vague descriptions. Fresh or prime labels where relative truth was flexible here. Bias settled finally on cheap cuts, likely tough and nearly spoiled, knowing spices, when available, would mask troubling flavors and unpleasant smells later at home. Returning from the market, baskets carried modest rewards, food purchased through tough negotiation and relentless compromise. These goods, often gritty, bruised, or questionable, were nonetheless treasured. Cooking later transformed dubious items into meals just edible enough to sustain life. Families knew better than to complain. The food, though imperfect, was a victory against hunger, a testament to their daily struggle and quiet resilience. In these humble kitchens, nothing purchased would ever be wasted. Asterisk butchers in 1850 often occupied a paradoxical position, trusted yet quietly suspected. Their shops held both promise and unease. Chunks of meat hung openly, often attracting flies despite attempts at cleanliness. Behind reassuring smiles, butchers quietly disguised less savory truths, selling meat sometimes past its prime, or mixing in cuts from animals less traditionally eaten. Customers, mostly unaware, relied on trust, preferring ignorance over confronting uncomfortable possibilities. Meat was meat. Hunger allowed few complaints or questions. Many families learned quickly to avoid the priciest cuts. Instead, they chose cheaper options, parts tougher and less appetizing, requiring prolonged boiling or roasting to become chewable. These lower-priced selections were frequently labeled ambiguously, hence the nickname mystery meat. At home, careful cooks removed questionable portions, attempting to disguise off flavors with heavy spices or prolonged cooking. Mystery meat became part of daily life, accepted grudgingly yet gratefully, symbolic of survival in difficult circumstances. Local rumors occasionally circulated, tales of missing pets or livestock suspiciously coinciding with new meat availability at shops. Though mostly exaggerated, such whispers lingered, feeding a persistent suspicion among villagers. Families sometimes joke nervously about the true origins of their dinner, humor masking genuine concerns. But hunger trumped caution, silencing doubts with practicality. Mystery meat was unpleasantly common and unavoidable, even a harsh compromise made daily between hunger and discomforting uncertainty. Asterisk. Sugar and spices in 1850 were rare luxuries, accessible mostly to wealthier classes. For common folk, these were precious items reserved strictly for special occasions. Sugary treats or spiced foods became treasured experiences, often remembered fondly for weeks or even months. Sugar, when afforded, arrived in hard cones, scraped sparingly to sweeten otherwise bland dishes. Cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg, purchased rarely, were carefully rationed to enhance special dishes or celebrations, adding fleeting glimpses of refinement to otherwise harsh lives. Households safeguarded these precious commodities meticulously, hidden securely within locked pantries or high shelves away from curious children's fingers. Mothers rationed carefully, often stretching small amounts across multiple dishes, allowing their families fleeting indulgences of sweetness or spice. Holidays, birthdays, or weddings meant brief tastes of richer fare cookies, sweetened modestly, or soups, gently spiced, transforming simple meals into memorable feasts. For many, such moments were highlights amid daily monotony. The absence of sugar or spice made daily cooking monotonous, yet people adapted, creating innovative alternatives: fruit preserves, honey gathered locally, or herbs foraged from nearby fields. Families treasured these humble substitutes, viewing creativity as another means of survival. Their kitchens, simple and rustic, became laboratories of necessity, each modest meal enriched by ingenuity rather than expensive ingredients. Such resourcefulness defined cooking in 1850. An essential strategy within harsh realities. Asterisk for children living in 1850, sweets remained elusive fantasies, imagined more than tasted. Occasionally, they glimpsed candies displayed tantalizingly behind shop windows, brightly colored and irresistibly sweet, yet perpetually beyond reach. Parents, lacking sufficient funds, gently discouraged eager desires, urging practicality over indulgence. Still, children's imaginations flourished, picturing vividly how sugar might taste sweet, delightful, far better than daily gruel or gritty bread. Dreams of candies became precious treasures, enjoyed purely in hopeful fantasies. Sometimes, a generous neighbor or visiting relative brought small treats, a candy stick or molasses candy. Shared carefully, each child received a tiny piece, savored with slow reverence, prolonging the rare pleasure. These brief tastes lingered vividly in memories, nourishing hopes and dreams long after sugar dissolved on tongues. Stories of sweets became bedtime tales whispered between siblings beneath thin blankets, keeping imaginations alive even as hunger persisted. Such scarcity taught children valuable lessons: gratitude for small gifts, patience through scarcity, creativity to overcome disappointment. They grew accustomed to life's harshness early, savoring simple joys profoundly when discovered. These lessons stayed with them as adults, shaping resilient characters defined by endurance, gratitude, and resourcefulness. Childhood in 1850 wasn't sweetened by abundant candy, but enriched by imagination, dreams, and an unyielding belief in better days ahead. Asterisk. As winter approached in 1850, preserving food became critical for survival. Families engaged tirelessly in rituals handed down through generations: salting meat, pickling vegetables, and drying fruit meticulously to last through harsh months. Cellars filled gradually with salted pork, jars of brined cabbage, and strings of dried apples suspended from ceiling beams, creating scenes that promised sustenance. Each preservation method required precision, patience, and unwavering attention, ensuring food didn't spoil prematurely. Salting was particularly vital, transforming tough meat into edible stores capable of enduring the bitterest cold. Large barrels, brimming with coarse salt, stood prominently in kitchens where pieces of pork or beef were layered generously with salt crystals. Over time, moisture drained, leaving meat firm yet intensely salty edible, if somewhat unpleasant, nourishment. During desperate months, families soaked preserved meat thoroughly before cooking, attempting to soften flavors and textures, turning harsh preservation into a necessary art form. Pickling vegetables, another essential task, turned sparse harvests into winter-long provisions. Cabbages, carrots, and cucumbers submerged in vinegar brine awaited consumption quietly on cellar shelves. These jars, sealed tightly, represented security against hunger. Though flavors were notably sour and acidic, still families adapted their tastes, appreciating pickled fare despite its sharpness. Vinegar, valued not just for flavor, but its preservative qualities, became a staple household necessity, as indispensable as salt itself. Drying fruits was tedious, yet rewarding. Sliced apples, pears, or berries, laid carefully under sunlight, gradually shrank into leathery morsels, offering occasional sweetness amid bleak winters. Though dried fruits toughened considerably, losing their fresh juiciness. Children delighted nonetheless in rare winter treats. Occasionally, dried fruits sweetened oatmeal or bread, bringing brief happiness amid daily monotony. Each slice, carefully dried and stored, symbolized family resilience, ingenuity, and preparation against harsh winter days. Families often shared preservation techniques, passing wisdom across neighbors, strengthening community bonds. Survival depended heavily on mutual support, cooperation, and shared knowledge of preservation practices. Kitchens and cellars transformed into communal spaces, bustling with shared labor, stories exchanged warmly over boiling pots or salted barrels. Despite harsh realities, these communal activities fostered genuine connections, softening otherwise unforgiving winters. Preserved foods not only nourished bodies, but nurtured spirits, offering quiet assurance that spring would someday return. Eating in 1850 was often perilous due to frequent outbreaks of foodborne illnesses. Hygiene standards were minimal, food storage inadequate, and contamination common. Families, unaware of microscopic dangers, routinely faced illness from spoiled milk, contaminated water, or improperly preserved meats. Symptoms, painful stomach cramps, fevers, vomiting, were alarmingly common occurrences, frighteningly accepted as part of daily existence. Many suffered silently, uncertain of causes, attributing sickness vaguely to spoiled foods or bad air. Milk, consumed frequently by families fortunate enough to own cows, spoiled rapidly without refrigeration. Even freshly drawn milk sometimes harbored unseen threats. Contaminated buckets, dirty hands, infected animals introduced risks families scarcely understood. Children, particularly vulnerable, suffered often, prompting wary mothers to heat milk cautiously, attempting to eliminate hidden dangers. Yet illnesses persisted stubbornly, highlighting gaps in knowledge and perpetuating cycles of sickness and recovery. Ongoing struggles accepted without clear solutions. Meat, especially mystery meat, posed significant dangers. Poor preservation or insufficient cooking frequently caused severe food poisoning outbreaks. Families struggled distinguishing spoiled meat from merely questionable fare, often gambling unknowingly on their health. Local doctors, minimally effective, prescribed rest, herbal remedies, or simply urged prayers. Severe cases led tragically. 2 death losses quietly mourned, stark reminders of daily vulnerabilities hidden within seemingly ordinary meals. Such tragedies lingered heavily in communal memories. Vegetables, typically viewed as safe, also posed unexpected threats. Contaminated water, irrigating gardens, or improper manure usage resulted frequently in disease. villagers suffered recurrent outbreaks of cholera or dysentery, diseases swift and merciless, striking entire households unexpectedly. Each outbreak sparked fear and uncertainty, families feeling helpless against invisible dangers. Slowly, however, communities began implementing improved sanitation practices. Driven largely by harsh experiences, collective tragedies inspiring gradual changes toward safer living conditions. Despite hazards, life continued persistently. Each illness endured with quiet bravery. Families accepted risks stoically, their resilience shaped profoundly by constant vulnerability. Foodborne illnesses, though harsh, fostered tight community bonds, shared sufferings, creating deeper empathy among neighbors. Gradually, small improvements in hygiene emerged, reflecting growing awareness and evolving attitudes toward food safety. Such progress was slow but meaningful, paving paths toward healthier, safer futures despite lingering struggles. Asterisk, Sundays in 1850 provided rare reprieve from daily monotony, offering small yet cherished celebrations around humble tables. Families donned slightly cleaner garments, gathering joyfully after attending church services. Meals, though modest, improved slightly from weekday offerings perhaps, including small portions of fresh meat, potatoes roasted tenderly, or loaves of newly baked bread. Sundays symbolized gratitude and rest, meals enriched lovingly with careful preparation. Brief escapes from relentless hardships defining weekdays. Meat served on Sundays, though minimal, tasted exceptionally delicious compared to usual fare. Chicken or rabbit occasionally appeared, cooked gently, seasoned sparingly, yet skillfully. Children awaited eagerly, savoring each tender bite slowly, prolonging pleasures rare throughout harsh weeks. Parents, hearts warmed by family gatherings, watched contentedly, quietly grateful they had provided moments of happiness despite financial struggles. Sunday's simple feast was less about food abundance, more about shared joy, connection, temporary relief from hardship. Freshly baked bread enhanced Sunday's charm immensely. Kitchens filled warmly with comforting aromas of yeast, flour, and fire. Dough, kneaded painstakingly by weary hands, rose beautifully, promising delightful tastes soon savored. Bread, tender and steaming, became communal centerpieces, breaking crusts, signifying familial unity. Spreading modestly churned butter across warm slices created joyful indulgences rare on weekdays. Elevating simple meals into cherished experiences, remembered fondly throughout upcoming struggles. Desserts on Sundays were modest yet eagerly anticipated perhaps. Apple pies sweetened modestly with honey or preserved fruits layered carefully over simple pastry. Children's eyes widened joyfully when sweets appeared, brief yet unforgettable luxuries. Each bite offered happiness, warmly embraced, highlighting life's occasional kindness amid routine difficulties. Families treasured these humble desserts immensely, savoring slowly, hoping secretly such sweetness would someday become regular rather than exceptional experiences. Evening lingered peacefully following Sunday feasts. Families sharing stories around dimly lit tables, laughter gently echoing through simple homes. Meals weren't extravagant, but deeply satisfying emotionally, nourishing spirits profoundly alongside bodies. Sundays symbolized hope, perseverance, and cherished connections, temporarily eclipsing daily hardships. Such humble feasts demonstrated powerfully that even simplest foods, when shared lovingly, could momentarily transform harsh lives into experiences rich with joy, warmth, and enduring memories. Asterisk in 1850. Many families supplemented their limited diets by foraging or hunting. Men rose at dawn, carrying old muskets into dense forests, hoping to capture rabbits or squirrels. Every animal caught was a victory against hunger. Women and children scoured fields and woods, carefully picking wild berries, mushrooms, and edible plants, mindful to distinguish nourishment from poison. A teen, though uncertain and exhausting, these efforts provided necessary variety, filling stomachs and lifting spirits in challenging times. Wild game, when successfully hunted, offered nourishing, protein-rich meals rare in daily life. Rabbits, small deer, or squirrels were prepared simply roasted, slowly over fires, or stewed to tenderness. Each bite was cherished, the meat's delicate flavor savored gratefully by families accustomed only to tough, salted fare. The rare luxury of freshly hunted meat briefly alleviated hardship, creating celebrations around humble tables, reviving hope, and renewing strength for future struggles. Foraging, though vital, was often tedious and risky. Mistakenly eaten mushrooms or berries sometimes led to painful illnesses, teaching caution harshly. Yet, foraging provided essential vitamins otherwise lacking. Wild greens, berries, and roots transformed bland dishes, introducing welcome flavors, textures, and nutrients. Families passed knowledge carefully between generations, ensuring survival techniques endured. These outings, though difficult, forged tighter familial bonds through shared labor and rewards. Children learned early the nuances of nature's bounty, where to find berries ripening sweetly or plants providing medicinal relief. Each journey into fields or forests became valuable lessons in resilience and resourcefulness. Despite hardship, foraging offered brief adventures and discoveries, brightening childhood memories. Nature, harsh yet generous, provided necessary nourishment through seasons, underscoring the fragile balance families maintained between starvation and sustenance. Though unpredictable, key, hunting, and foraging fostered respect for nature's gifts and dangers. Each meal gleaned from the wild was deeply appreciated, reinforcing humility and gratitude in daily existence. Families survived by skillfully harnessing wilderness resources, their persistence demonstrating quiet courage. Nature's bounty, though uncertain, offered vital sustenance life, sustained delicately through wisdom, caution, and relentless perseverance in an unforgiving world. Community gardens in 1850 became indispensable resources for struggling families. Neighbors collectively cultivated shared plots, planting potatoes, cabbages, and root vegetables hardy enough to endure unpredictable weather. These communal spaces symbolized unity, cooperation, and mutual reliance necessities for survival amid widespread poverty. Gardens thrived through collective labor, each harvest shared fairly, ensuring every family benefited, reinforcing trust and fostering solidarity. In challenging times, working gardens collectively strengthened bonds among neighbors. Elderly community members, experienced yet physically frail, guided younger generations, teaching valuable farming techniques. Children participated actively, learning responsibility through planting seeds, watering rows, and harvesting carefully. Gardens provided not just food, but essential life skills, community connections, and emotional support. Families recognized communal efforts brought greater yields, improved morale, and critical social cohesion amid ongoing adversity. Harvest days became special community celebrations, gatherings filled with gratitude and joy. Neighbors assembled proudly, dividing fresh produce equitably, exchanging friendly conversation and advice. Such occasions momentarily eased struggles, fostering lasting friendships. Shared meals occasionally followed harvest modest feasts, prepared communally, enriched with laughter, kindness, and compassion, nourishing spirits as profoundly as bodies. Community gardens sustained families practically and emotionally, profoundly influencing village resilience and survival. Though gardens occasionally failed from pests or drought, communal cooperation softened disappointments, losses became shared, comforting neighbors together, reminding each family they faced hardships not alone but collectively. Communities persevered despite setbacks, replanting persistently, stubbornly determined to triumph over adversity. Gardens symbolized powerful collective resilience. Proof strength lay not only in food harvested, but in bonds cultivated deeply among struggling neighbors. Community gardens remained critical lifelines throughout challenging seasons. Families remembered these spaces warmly, recalling friendships forged through shared labor. Hardship overcome together, and abundant harvests celebrating mutual resilience. Gardens proved nourishment went beyond food. Communities thrived by fostering kindness, unity, and unwavering support, critical elements sustaining lives in difficult eras. Traveling peddlers brought excitement and hope to isolated communities. In 1850, their wagons packed with intriguing goods, spices, candies, preserved fruits rarely seen. Villagers eagerly anticipated peddlers' arrivals. Children gathering wide-eyed, mesmerized by tantalizing sweets or bright packages displayed temptingly. Though items were often priced steeply, families occasionally indulged modestly, savoring rare treats, grateful for brief respite from harsh culinary monotony. The peddler's wagon represented dreams briefly attainable, temporary relief from hardship. Peddlers carried spices, cinnamon, nutmeg, cloves, adding precious flavors to otherwise dull meals. Families carefully rationed spices, purchased sparingly, enhancing dishes prepared lovingly. Mothers sprinkled spices lightly into oatmeal or broth, transforming mundane meals into delicacies savored deeply. Spices provided treasured tastes, fleeting luxuries, reminding families of life's occasional sweetness amid daily struggles. Each pinch represented hope, an uplifting break from monotonous culinary routines families routinely endured. Candies, purchased from peddlers, brought joy, especially for children accustomed to rarity. Bright, sweet peppermint sticks, molasses candies became cherished rewards, distributed sparingly, enjoyed thoroughly. Small candies lingered deliciously in memories, motivating children through difficult chores or prolonged hunger. Families viewed peddlers' goods as more than food. They represented kindness, celebration, simple joys, enriching harsh lives, briefly, yet profoundly. Brightening spirits long after sweetness faded. Despite enthusiasm, peddlers occasionally stirred suspicion. Families questioned origins of preserved goods, fruits, or meats, ambiguously labeled. Yet, hunger sometimes overcame caution, prompting risky purchases. Thankfully, most items were safe, providing welcome variety in otherwise monotonous diets. Communities trusted cautiously, recognizing peddlers' roles in brightening bleak circumstances. Ultimately, traveling peddlers symbolized resilience, adaptability, and hope, reminders small joys could sustain weary souls profoundly through difficult times. Bread was a relentless challenge for families in 1850, symbolic of both survival and hardship. Flour was expensive, frequently coarse, filled with grit and impurities that made chewing difficult and often painful. Women spent hours kneading heavy dough, baking over unpredictable fires, creating loaves unevenly browned and occasionally burnt. Each loaf represented painstaking labor. The results rarely perfect, but essential to daily survival. It's a stark reminder of life's harsh realities. Children eagerly anticipated bread, despite its rough texture, served stale more often than fresh. Slices were softened in broth or tea, making them easier to swallow. The crusts hard, tough, almost inedible, were chewed persistently, each bite an exercise in patience. Bread was rarely wasted, even scraps carefully saved, toasted or ground into crumbs. Families accepted discomfort stoically, understanding bread's gritty texture as normal, necessary nourishment, sustaining them through strenuous daily routines. Baking bread involved constant vigilance, controlling oven temperatures by experience rather than accurate instruments. Too hot or cold meant loaves ruined precious flour wasted tragically. Mothers stayed attentive, constantly checking dough, skillfully adjusting flames. Successful loaves were triumphs celebrated quietly. Failed ones mourned silently, yet quickly transformed into something edible. Nothing could be discarded casually. Bread symbolized resourcefulness, each slice testament to creativity, adaptability, and quiet endurance. Hunger forced families to stretch bread relentlessly. Thin slices, sparsely buttered, were carefully rationed throughout days. On scarce occasions, bread accompanied soup, broth, or thin stew, enhancing otherwise meager meals slightly. Families rarely enjoyed abundant bread. Hunger persistently gnawed at stomachs, yet slices remained comforting constants, reminders families could endure deprivation stoically, courageously. Bread epitomized life's daily struggle, yet families persisted, quietly determined, nourished more by resilience than actual food. Despite hardships, bread-making rituals forged deep family bonds. Mothers taught daughters baking skills patiently, passing wisdom lovingly through generations. Kitchens, though modest, became sacred spaces where bonds strengthened amid trials. Kay's loaf, baked, successful or not, symbolized family unity, sacrifice, and enduring hope. Bread embodied daily struggle, yet revealed quietly powerful strengths hidden within ordinary families, surviving together against odds. Asterisk in 1850, stretching meals became an essential, painstaking art form. Limited ingredients required mothers to creatively extend small amounts of food, ensuring family sustenance. Soups and stews were diluted deliberately, broths watery yet edible, vegetables cut thinly to appear plentiful. Small scraps of meat were diced finely, spread throughout. Dishes deceptively, offering illusionary abundance. Every meal preparation involved careful planning, stretching resources skillfully, culinary ingenuity born of necessity. Leftovers transformed cleverly into new dishes, nothing wasted. Yesterday's stew thickened, repurposed creatively into pies or casseroles. Bread crusts turned into crumbs for thickening soups. Sauces were sprinkled atop casseroles, disguising minimal ingredients artfully. Mothers stretched scant supplies masterfully, each meal becoming quiet triumphs of creativity, careful management, and relentless optimism. Such culinary ingenuity nourished families practically and emotionally, proving resourcefulness essential for survival in harsh conditions. Meal stretching required precise portioning, small servings distributed carefully among family members. Parents subtly took smaller portions, leaving more for growing children. Such quiet sacrifices went unnoticed publicly, but deeply appreciated privately. Meals, though scant, provided lessons in gratitude, sacrifice, and quiet courage. Families bonded profoundly through shared hardships. Each meal a testament to unwavering resilience, mutual support, and endless adaptability amid scarcity. Occasionally, neighbors pooled resources, combining modest ingredients into communal meals, stretching further together than individually possible. Such cooperation brought communities closer, strengthening ties through collective struggles. Shared meals, though simple, fostered joy, camaraderie, and temporary relief from isolation, scarcity, and hardship. Community meals symbolized solidarity, kindness, and collective perseverance. Reminders nourishment came from connections, kindness, and shared resilience as much as actual food. Ultimately, stretching meals in 1850 demonstrated human endurance profoundly. Families persevered not merely by surviving physically, but thriving emotionally through creativity, sacrifice, and unwavering hope. These humble dishes symbolize deeper strength's resilience, ingenuity, and quiet courage, transforming meager ingredients into nourishment for bodies and spirits alike. Meal stretching became symbolic artistry, profoundly defining families' persistent survival and optimism amid constant adversity. Malnutrition was widespread, yet often overlooked in 1850. Meals, though frequent, were nutritionally deficient, lacking essential vitamins, proteins, and minerals. Families survived physically, but suffered silently from hidden hunger, evidenced quietly through chronic fatigue, brittle bones, and stunted growth in children. Hunger wasn't merely immediate emptiness, but persistent deprivation, subtly undermining long-term health, weakening bodies gradually, quietly, relentlessly. Children suffered particularly harshly from hidden hunger, lacking vital nutrients. They developed slowly, their growth visibly stunted compared to healthier counterparts. Mothers worried silently, unaware precisely why their children remained frail, weak, susceptible, frequently, to illness. Medical knowledge was limited, nutritional deficiencies largely misunderstood. Families faced harsh realities daily. Malnutrition quietly accepted, symptoms endured stoically as normal challenges. Unquestioned hardships, hidden hunger, weakened communities profoundly. Workers tired quickly, productivity limited by persistent fatigue. Families struggled constantly, energy rarely sufficient for vigorous labor. Tasks completed slowly, painfully, yet persistently. Communities adapted quietly, compensating creatively shorter workdays, communal assistance, frequent rests. Malnutrition shaped routines invisibly, yet powerfully. Lives profoundly influenced by constant nutritional scarcity, silent yet insidious. Hardships enduring throughout generations. Though families understood little about nutrition, they intuitively pursued healthier diets whenever possible. Gardens emphasized hearty vegetables, potatoes, carrots, leafy greens, providing minimal yet critical nourishment. Occasional meat consumption, though scarce, brought essential nutrients, temporarily alleviating symptoms subtly. Families relied heavily on traditional knowledge, instinctively prioritizing diverse diets whenever possible, demonstrating innate resilience, adaptability, and quiet determination toward healthier futures despite persistent nutritional challenges. Malnutrition, though pervasive, never fully defined families' lives. They endured quietly, adapting subtly, persevering stubbornly despite constant hidden hardships. Communities remained optimistic, resilient, determined to overcome nutritional challenges, eventually through gradual improvements in agriculture, hygiene, and medical understanding. Hidden hunger persisted, yet families continually resisted defeat, enduring quietly powerful struggles, embodying strength through quiet perseverance, mutual support, and unwavering hope amid nutritional adversity. Asterisk, in 1850. Kitchens were hazardous spaces where accidents were frequent yet rarely discussed openly. Open flames, heavy iron pots, and inadequate tools posed daily risks. Women, typically responsible for cooking, navigated poorly ventilated kitchens filled with smoke, heat, and unpredictable fires. Burns from splattering fat or boiling water were common yet endured quietly, regarded as ordinary consequences of daily chores treated minimally at home and quickly forgotten amidst relentless duties. Fire presented constant danger, its management relying solely on intuition and experience rather than safe methods or modern equipment. Wood-burning stoves and fireplaces sparked unpredictably, causing sudden flare-ups capable of serious injury. Families maintained constant vigilance. Accidents remained frequent. Clothing ignited by stray sparks. Severe burns suffered silently. Medical treatment, when available, was rudimentary. Home remedies offering little relief. Wounds healing slowly. Scars becoming permanent. Reminders of daily kitchen struggles. Heavy cooking pots filled with boiling liquids added significant danger. Accidental spills, common in cramped kitchens, caused painful scalds endured without complaint. Children, eager yet inexperienced, occasionally suffered severe injuries while assisting with cooking tasks. Parents, deeply troubled, nonetheless, accepted accidents quietly, teaching caution persistently. Kitchen mishaps symbolized harsh realities families faced daily. Quiet acceptance of persistent risks taken simply to provide necessary nourishment. Sharp knives, worn tools, and poorly constructed equipment further heightened kitchen hazards. Deep cuts occurred frequently, quickly bandaged, work resuming rapidly despite pain or infection risks. Mothers worked swiftly, adeptly hiding injuries, unwilling to burden family members. Such resilience defined daily cooking, quiet courage, masking discomfort. Kitchens, spaces of necessity and danger intertwined. Injuries endured stoically symbolize persistent hardship, determination, quiet strength embodied profoundly by everyday cooking rituals. Despite persistent dangers, kitchen accidents fostered valuable lessons. Families emphasized caution, preparation, and patience. Children learned quickly kitchen discipline, respecting flames, boiling pots, and sharp utensils intuitively. These challenging environments instilled resilience deeply within communities, teaching caution alongside creativity, strength alongside vulnerability. Kitchens became spaces where families confronted danger bravely, adapted creatively, and emerged profoundly resilient, quietly determined to survive amid constant adversity. Asterisk in the harsh reality of 1850. Alcohol held complex roles in daily lives, sometimes nourishment, occasionally escape. Hard laborers relied frequently on beer or cider, drinks providing both hydration and essential calories absent from limited diets. Small beer, lightly fermented, was consumed regularly by adults and children, alike regarded less as indulgence, more as vital dietary supplement. Alcoholic beverages were nutritional necessities, offering relief, comfort, and vital sustenance amid difficult daily routines. Stronger spirits, whiskey, rum, gin served differently, offering emotional escapes from relentless hardships. Men gathered occasionally, drinking quietly in village taverns, sharing camaraderie, momentarily forgetting hunger, exhaustion, or despair. Alcohol briefly softened life's harsh edges, providing emotional respite despite lingering risks. Excessive drinking occasionally spiraled dangerously, threatening health, family stability, and community harmony, yet alcohol's allure endured persistently. Temporary escape, powerfully appealing amid ongoing deprivation. Women, traditionally, avoiding strong drinks openly, consumed medicinal tinctures, frequently herbal remedies infused subtly with spirits. Such beverages alleviated ailments, reduced pain, and occasionally masked emotional distress privately. Alcohol, concealed within medicine cabinets, symbolized quiet coping strategies, allowing women subtle, socially acceptable relief from persistent hardships. Communities recognized alcohol's dual roles, necessary nourishment, yet potential danger, balancing consumption carefully, yet inevitably confronting complications. Alcohol introduced quietly into daily lives. Children learned early about alcohol's complexities, the central dietary role alongside its dangers when abused. Parents instructed cautiously, modeling moderation intuitively. Families navigated alcohol consumption carefully, recognizing necessity while vigilantly guarding against excess. Communities occasionally confronted alcoholism publicly, families discreetly managing issues privately. Alcohol became symbolic necessary, yet complicated nourishment, occasional escape, always requiring careful balance maintained through collective wisdom, its quiet strength, and persistent caution. Alcohol's presence illustrated broader struggles. Families faced daily necessity intertwined closely with vulnerability. Communities balanced carefully nourishment against escape, relief against risk. Despite complications, alcohol's role persisted powerfully, profoundly shaping village life, reflecting humanity's complexities, strengths, vulnerabilities, and enduring resilience. Families confronted alcohol cautiously, understanding profoundly. Nourishment's delicate balance with vulnerability. Quiet courage embodied in persistent moderation amid daily challenges. Recipes in 1850 were precious heirlooms, carefully preserved through generations. Handwritten in worn notebooks, treasured recipes provided practical guidance alongside emotional comfort. Families guarded closely cooking instructions for breads, soups, and pies, each dish carrying memories, tradition, and ancestral wisdom. Recipes symbolized continuity, family history preserved lovingly within culinary traditions, strength found in familiar tastes, sustaining spirits profoundly through ongoing hardships. Mothers taught daughters cooking skills tenderly, recipes shared as intimate rituals, lessons extending beyond mere food preparation. Recipes provided guidance through challenging seasons, how to stretch limited ingredients creatively, which herbs to forage, or preserving foods safely through harsh winters. Culinary traditions became essential survival skills. Families strengthened profoundly through shared cooking knowledge. Resilience, embodied in traditional recipes, carefully transmitted, deeply valued across generations. Recipes occasionally evolved, subtly, adapting creatively to ingredient scarcity or changing circumstances. Families modified instructions cautiously, carefully balancing tradition with necessary innovation. Substitutions became common: honey for sugar, dried fruits for fresh, each change reflecting creative adaptability amid scarcity. Recipes thus embodied resilience, families quietly, creatively responding to hardships, culinary traditions continuously evolving, yet profoundly connecting generations through shared struggles, adaptation, and resilience. Special occasions saw traditional recipes celebrated joyfully: holiday pies, birthday cakes, festival breads, prepared carefully despite scarcity. Each dish symbolized love, sacrifice, and quiet hope. Families preserved lovingly despite hardship. Culinary traditions provided emotional nourishment alongside physical sustenance, each recipe embodying deeper values: resilience, sacrifice, and unwavering optimism. Families recognize food's profound emotional roles, recipes connecting profoundly past, present, and future through shared culinary rituals. Recipes endured persistently, treasured as living history. Families passed down carefully culinary wisdom, understanding deeply food's symbolic power in preserving identity, strength, and unity amid challenges. Each recipe represented profound nourishment, practical guidance, emotional comfort, and enduring resilience. Families preserved persistently across generations. Culinary traditions endured quietly, yet powerfully, symbolizing strength hidden within everyday meals prepared lovingly, courageously, and resiliently throughout generations. Asterisk, despite harsh realities of eating in 1850, families dreamed persistently of abundance, imagining better futures constantly. Conversations frequently revolved around imagined feast staples overflowing generously with fresh bread, tender meats, sweet fruits, and delicate pastries. Dreams of abundant meals sustained families emotionally, providing essential hope amid persistent scarcity, reminding everyone brighter futures remained possible, inspiring quiet resilience and unwavering perseverance daily. Children particularly treasured dreams of abundance, picturing vividly sweets tasted rarely or meals remembered fondly from occasional celebrations. Dreams nurtured imaginations, profoundly encouraging hopefulness, determination, and optimism despite daily hardships endured quietly. Families understood intuitively nourishment extended beyond mere food dreams, provided emotional sustenance, profoundly essential amid daily struggles. Fueling quiet strength, families preserved courageously, toward eventual abundance. Parents quietly nurtured children's hopeful imaginations, neighborhoods sharing occasionally personal dreams for better futures. Conversations around humble tables frequently revolved around imagined prosperity gardens, abundant meals, nutritious, and homes comfortable. These dreams represented families' quiet defiance against adversity, inspiring determination, optimism, and resilience embodied powerfully within daily survival strategies. Families endured hardships stubbornly, believing firmly brighter futures achievable eventually through relentless persistence, resourcefulness, and hope. Communities collectively imagined improved futures constantly, shared visions fostering collective motivation toward gradual progress. Conversations within villages frequently envisioned better agricultural practices, improved food safety, and increased economic opportunities. Shared dreams provided communal strength profoundly, uniting neighbors toward common goals, collective determination, quietly overcoming adversity through mutual support, perseverance, and enduring optimism. Imagined abundance profoundly influenced gradual progress communities achieved persistently, reflecting human determination's quiet yet profound strength. Ultimately, dreams sustained families powerfully amid harsh culinary realities in 1850. Imagined abundance symbolized profound nourishment, hope, resilience, and determination families embodied quietly yet powerfully daily. Believing firmly eventual prosperity achievable through quiet courage, relentless persistence, and unwavering optimism. Dreams provided essential emotional sustenance. Quietly powerful nourishment families relied on persistently, courageously facing each day, determined firmly toward brighter futures, inevitably within reach. The sound of the dinner bell in 1850 carried more than its metallic chimette carried hope. In homes, on farms, and in small workshops, the bell or call signaled the pause of labor and the promise of nourishment, no matter how modest. Children perked up at the sound, wiping soil from their hands, running eagerly toward the source. Men returned from fields or mills with sore muscles and hollow stomachs. Women, often already in aprons, ushered family members toward the hearth, where steam rose from simple pots. What awaited was not a feast, but a shared experience. Meals were eaten together, slowly, with a reverence that made up for the lack of richness on the plate. Even the blandest dishes became meaningful in this context. Gruel or bread soup was passed around carefully. A single piece of meat, if present, was divided with near sacred fairness. The dinner bell didn't promise indulgence, it promised community, rest, and a brief moment of unity before the long night ahead. Conversations during dinner varied, sometimes quiet, sometimes full of laughter, always underscored by exhaustion. Stories were shared about strange things spotted in the woods, disagreements in the marketplace, or memories of better seasons. These exchanges gave flavor to the meal, reminding everyone that even in scarcity, they had one another. There was poetry in the way forks and spoons clinked against wooden bowls, how hands moved in rhythm, how children watched their parents and mimicked their restraint. The lighting was always dim. Candles flickered or oil lamps burned low, casting shadows that made this simple table look almost dramatic. The smell of boiled cabbage, roasted roots, or onions lingered in the air, mixing with the faint scent of smoke from the chimney. Outside, the day faded into silence, and inside, warmth gathered in the form of breath, steam, and familiar presence. The dinner bell signaled the pause in the hardship, a pocket of warmth in the coldness of survival. Meals were never rushed, though hunger was sharp. The understanding of scarcity led to slow, intentional eating. Each bite was savored or at least extended as long as possible. Children were taught to chew properly, to eat respectfully, to clean their plates. Waste was not tolerated. Even bones were boiled for broth. Crumbs were swept into a jar for thickening stews, and vegetable peels were added to compost or feed. Nothing that could give life was discarded. After dinner, the table was wiped down and dishes rinsed with water fetched from the well. Often, a final piece of bread or a small bit of fruit was saved for the next morning. The family would sit for a few moments longer before separating into their respective chores or beds. The bell had long since gone quiet, but its echo lingered in their bones, marking the close of another day, one through work, cooperation, and meager meals that carried meaning far beyond their ingredients. In a world of uncertainty, the dinner bell greeted structure, comfort, and a moment of peace. It reminded everyone, from the youngest child to the eldest grandparent, that they had made it through another day together. And in that brief stillness between the clatter of plates and the silence of sleep, they found their strength not in what they ate, but in how they endured. In 1850, before any food reached the table, its scent told the first story. The smell of hope drifted through small cottages and farmhouses, trailing from hearths and makeshift ovens. Boiling grains, roasting root vegetables, or even simple onions, sautéed in lard, filled the air with anticipation. For many, that scent was more nourishing than the meal itself, signaled that something warm and real was on its way. A moment of comfort, carved out of hardship. Children often hovered near the kitchen doorway, drawn by the aroma. Their stomachs rumbled, but their minds wandered imagining feasts their bellies would never know. Still, the smell of soup or bread or roasted parsnips gave their imaginations wings. Inhaling deeply, they felt briefly full. Even the poorest homes found power in these smells. A crust of bread baking could momentarily erase the ache of poverty, drawing neighbors or passers-by with its gentle magic. For mothers and cooks, scent was a tool of control and encouragement. A broth too bland could be revived with a pinch of herb or a hint of vinegar, not just for taste, but for morale. The smell of simmering metevan, if it was mostly bone-lifted spirits, and stirred the soul. People didn't eat with just their mouths. They prepared with their noses, building expectations and staving off disappointment by focusing on what was possible rather than what was missing. Sometimes, scent betrayed hope. A burned loaf, an overcooked stew, or sour milk revealed failure, exhaustion, or poor ingredients. In those moments, the mood of a home could shift drastically. Yet, even then, families pressed on. They added water, scraped off burnt edges, stirred more vigorously. They turned errors into new dishes, convinced that even flawed food had value. The resilience to continue cooking, even through disappointment, defined them as much as their survival itself. Communities often gathered scents into their collective memory. Each village had its signature smells, some earthy and comforting, others pungent and peculiar. These scents became symbols of origin and identity. A certain stew might smell like Aunt Clara's home. Specific bread might recall a wedding or a funeral. Food smells were maps of memory sewn into the air with the same care as stitched quilts on beds. Hope, in many ways, came on the wind. It passed through kitchens, lingered in hallways, clung to clothes. It was strongest when a new pot was uncovered, when a loaf came out of the fire, when a neighbor walked over with something wrapped in cloth. Even if hunger returned too soon, those moments of aroma held people steady. They reminded them that nourishment wasn't just in calories, it was in imagination, its love, and scent. Though food was scarce, the smell of it was abundant. It filled rooms, dreams, and hearts. It floated like music without instruments, lifting tired souls. In 1850, when hope was hard to come by, sometimes it smelled like barley soup, warm bread, and stewed onions drifting from a pot that had barely enough to go around. Asterisk, when rain fell in 1850, it wasn't just the land that soaked in silence, it was the people. Rainy days brought slower movements, heavier air, and often emptier cupboards. Wet fields meant no harvesting, muddy roads meant no markets, and leaky roofs meant colder kitchens. In these moments, families turned inward, wrapping shawls tighter, and hoping the last root vegetable hadn't yet sprouted mold. The cupboard became a chamber of suspense, each opening an act of quiet desperation. Rain tapping on windows accompanied the scratching sound of knives on wooden counters, trying to coax one more meal from the dwindling scraps. A turnip that had softened, a few carrots left too long, a heel of hard bread. These became the ingredients for a meal made of memory and willpower. Mothers stirred pots half filled, extending the broth with water, knowing it would be thin but warm. Warmth, not flavor, was the day's victory. Children asked fewer questions on rainy days. They sensed the mood, read the glances exchanged between their parents. They played more quietly, sometimes curling near the fire with fingers clasped over growling stomachs. Rain muted everything, even hunger. It seemed to ask the household to wait, to be still, to endure, tend. So they did, waiting for the storm to pass, for the next delivery, for the soil to dry, for better days. Neighbors, sometimes, knocked with half a loaf to share or an extra onion found behind the shed. On rainy days, generosity bloomed despite scarcity. A shared pot between two families tasted richer, and the flicker of candles across two tables, joined by necessity, created a warmth that neither household had managed alone. In hardship, they learned that food wasn't only fuel, it was trust, alliance, and human connection. Cupboards weren't just storage, they were reflections of fear and hope. An empty shelf could bring tears, while a forgotten jar of beans could spark celebration. Each item was a seed of possibility, a lifeline extended into the future. When cupboards grew bare, creativity rose. Recipes that didn't exist the day before came to life, stitched together from memory, instinct, and a desire to keep going. Evening brought stories to distract from hunger. Elders told of years worse than this, of nights colder and rain that never stopped. It reminded the young that endurance was the meal of the poor, that if you could sit together in the rain, you could stand together in the sun. These tales wove courage through the silence, and as the wind howled outside, count of strength grew between the walls. Rain eventually stopped. The clouds drifted. The ground, once soggy and hopeless, began to dry. The lessons of rainy days lingered, lessons about sharing when there's little, waiting when there's nothing, and the extraordinary ability to make something from nearly nothing. In 1850, rain didn't just test the land, it tested the soul, and in kitchens across the countryside, souls held strong. Asterisk in small towns and quiet valleys of 1850. A knock at the door during supper could mean trouble or grace. Strangers appeared without warning, a traveler, a worker passing through, someone with a heavy coat and a heavier past. In many homes, despite scarcity, the custom remained. If someone came to the door while a pot was on the fire, they would be invited in, not for luxury, but for humanity. A stranger at the table changed the mood. Children grew quiet. The father sat straighter. The mother measured the food again with her eyes. Would there be enough? Even if there wasn't, it didn't matter. A portion would be found. A bowl half filled would be shared into thirds. Crust of bread would become a symbol of dignity, not excess. Hospitality meant everything, even if it meant less for yourself. The stranger, often weathered and tired, understood the silent transaction taking place. Grateful, they ate slowly, offering stories between bites. Tales of cities far away, of floods, of wars, of long-lost families. Their words painted pictures brighter than the fire, filling the room with far-off winds and invisible hills. For one evening, meager stew turned into something magical, seasoned with narrative. Enriched by presence, children listened with wide eyes. They asked questions after the guest had left. Was it true about the factory with iron dragons? Did trains really move faster than horses? The parents smiled, letting imagination stir alongside the soup still clinging to the sides of the bowl. The visit had left them hungrier perhaps, but also fuller in spirit. A strange contradiction they welcomed without resistance. Sometimes the stranger left something behind, a hand-carved spoon, a song, a blessing, or simply a thank you that lingered long after footsteps faded down the road. They were rarely seen again, but their moment at the table became a story of its own. Do you remember that night he told us about New Orleans? Someone would whisper years later while slicing a turnip in a world of uncertainty and distance. Food was the bridge. Even the simplest meal could create a bond strong enough to last a lifetime. A stranger at the table tested the boundaries of generosity, but it also revealed the shape of the soul. Those who had the least often gave the most, because they understood the weight of hunger, not just of the body, but of the heart. And so, when the knock came again, another rainy night, during another thin stewed, they opened the door without question, because in 1850, hospitality wasn't a matter of wealth. It was a matter of being human. In 1850, celebration did not arrive on silver platters. It arrived in the form of slightly sweeter bread, meat that wasn't salted, or butter added to mashed potatoes. Families didn't celebrate with abundance, but with presence with everyone, seated with something extra on the plate, even if just a wildflower tucked in a napkin. Weddings, baptisms, harvests, and homecomings were honored not by excess, but by effort. Every dish made was a symbol of triumph over scarcity. The table would be stretched with crates, boxes, or benches to seat more people. Neighbors came bearing what little they had: jam in reused jars, pickled onions, or a pie with bruised apples sweetened with molasses. Laughter filled the spaces where gravy should have been. The food wasn't beautiful, but it was honest. It told stories of what they grew, what they traded, and what they'd been saving for just this day. Children ran barefoot around the gathering, faces smeared with the rare sweetness of something baked. Elders sat near the fire, sipping from chipped cups, smiling at the energy around them. The host would always say they hadn't done enough, and everyone would respond that it was more than enough. Second helpings were rare, but smiles were endless. There was no pretending. What was on the table was all they had. Somehow, it was plenty. Often, there was music, a fiddle, a voice, a hand-slapping rhythm on a tin bowl. The clatter of spoons on empty plates joined in. And after the food was gone, the stories began. Stories that needed no spice, no garnish, just memory. And even as the wind picked up or the lanterns dimmed, no one wanted to leave. 'Cause for a few hours, hunger had no power here. In its place was community, joy, and connection. What was left was scraped and saved. Crumbs became breadcrumbs. Bones became broth. Nothing was wasted, not the food, nor the time together. These celebrations were bookmarked in memory with flavor and feeling. That was the year we had the pumpkin stew, someone would say. Or, that was the pie with clove and laughter. Food was always present in those moments, not for its luxury, but for its meaning. Preparing for these days took weeks. Dried beans, rehydrated, onions braided and hung to dry, flour saved carefully. The anticipation was as important as the meal itself. It gave people something to work toward, something to talk about when the fields were dry or the baby was sick. These celebrations weren't just about honoring milestones. They were about keeping the spirit alive through flavor, tradition, and gathering. In a world where meals were functional and modest, celebration meals were sacred. They reminded people of what they had overcome, of who they still had by their side, and of the sweetness that could still be found in a harsh world. The food may have disappeared quickly from the plates, but it remained forever in the heart. Asterisk, long before the world knew the convenience of vegetable oil or margarine, animal fat ruled the kitchen. In 1850, lard, tallow, and drippings were culinary gold, collected, cooled, and used with precision. These fats didn't just cook food, they aced flavor, preserved ingredients, and fed families when nothing else could. A spoonful of rendered lard was more valuable than a bag of spices because it meant something could be fried, something could be rich. Even if just for a moment, fat was not wasted, was prized. After a pig was butchered, the lard was rendered carefully, jarred in stone pots, and stored in cool cellars. Even the drippings from a pan of roast were strained and poured into jars, layered with memory. A bit of this fat turned dry cornbread into something indulgent. A smear of it on the bottom of a skillet kept potatoes from sticking and added depth no one could describe, but everyone craved. Vegetables, when fried in fat, became luxurious. Onions, sizzled and softened. Cabbage, caramelized, and even turnips, took on a tenderness unknown in boiling. Bread dipped in pork drippings was considered a meal. Biscuits made with lard were softer and richer, holding a memory of the animal that gave them life. Fat was not just an ingredient, it was a bridge between hunger and satisfaction, between survival and indulgence. The irony was clear. Richness in those days came not from what was bought, but from what was saved. Modern diets might fear fat, but in 1850 it was the symbol of a home that was managing. A family with a crock of tallow had warmth, flavor, and preservation. It meant candles could be made, pans greased, and hands softened after work. Fat was life stored, respected, and used wisely. Children learned early the difference between bacon, grease, and suet, which to save for biscuits, which for lanterns. Even scraps of fatty meat were boiled for hours to release their oils. Fats extended meals, flavored soups, and made otherwise unappetizing cuts palatable. They turned scarcity into satisfaction. In a world where butter was rare and expensive, lard was the everyday luxury of the working class. There was reverence in the way fat was handled. No spoonful was taken lightly. It was added at the end, a flourish, a blessing. Women knew just how much to use so the dish would sing rather than shout. Too much was wasteful. Too little was a missed opportunity. In those kitchens, cooking wasn't about recipe, was about feel, smell, memory, and intuition. Today, many have forgotten the power of those spoonfuls. But in 1850, fat was the thread that held a meal together, was a symbol of nothing wasted, of everything earned. Humble dishes there saw. It was proof that even the plainest food could be beautiful if only given the right amount of time. Fire and fat. Asterisk, in 1850, sending a child to school meant more than just finding a pencil and slate. It meant deciding what, anything, they could bring to eat. There were no cafeterias, no standardized lunches. Each family packed what they could, often wrapping a piece of bread in cloth or slipping a boiled potato into a coat pocket. The weight of that lunch wasn't just physical, it was emotional. It spoke volumes about what a household could afford, and what it couldn't. Some children came with small tins filled with leftover porridge or lard biscuits. Others came empty-handed, cheeks flushed from shame more than cold. They sat quietly during breaks, pretending not to notice the smell of onions or salted pork from a classmate's parcel. Sharing happened, but always discreetly. No one wanted to embarrass the giver or the receiver. A bite here, half a biscuit there, hunger shaped kindness into something both humble and holy. Mothers fretted over these small meals. They often went without themselves to ensure their children had something in hand. They knew the looks children gave each other at the lunch bell, the way envy curled quietly behind polite smiles. A hard crust of bread might mean avoiding ridicule. A full lunch, no matter how simple, was armor in a world where poverty spoke loudly in silence. Teachers noticed, but said little. They understood the weight of scarcity and the pride of the poor. Occasionally, one might slide a baked apple into a child's bag, or leave a note asking if the little one would like to help sweep after class in exchange for a biscuit. These were silent mercies, given without announcement, accepted with immense gratitude. Lunch was short, and hunger remained. Children returned to lessons with empty bellies or just enough fuel to make it through the afternoon. They learned arithmetic with grumbling stomachs, read poetry through headaches, and practiced penmanship while dreaming of supper. And yet, they learned, Makad, like food, was survival. And in many homes, it was the only inheritance they could count on. When school let out, children ran home not for freedom, but for food. If lucky, a warm pot waited. If not, they sat quietly until something could be scraped together. And so the cycle continued, learning through hunger, growing through grit. School lunch wasn't a break from the day. It was a mirror of the home, a glimpse into what it meant to grow up when every bite counted. Still, in those sparse lunch hours, friendships were born. Bread was broken together, secrets were shared, and dreams were whispered over dry crusts and cold roots. Hunger didn't erase hope, it simply sharpened it. And in every schoolhouse, across every rural stretch, children learned that surviving together often tasted better than eating alone. In many homes of 1850, tea was not just a beverage, it was a strategy. When hunger grew loud and food grew thin, tea stepped in as a quiet ally. Brewed from herbs, roots, leaves, or bark, it filled bellies and stretched time. It gave families something warm to hold, to sip, to believe in. When bread was gone and dinner was hours away, tea brought patience. It calmed the stomach and distracted the mind. There were many kinds of tea, depending on the season and what nature offered. Mint, chamomile, dandelion, elderflower, each brought its own scent, its own story. Some were gathered by hand from nearby meadows or gardens. Others were dried and saved in glass jars, like treasure. In winter, tea might be made from pine needles or onion skins. Anything that could offer warmth and a faint flavor. Children learned early to accept tea as a stand-in for meals. A hot cup with a teaspoon of honey could silence hunger long enough to fall asleep. Mothers sipped it while sewing, hoping it would quiet their own gnawing emptiness. Fathers drank it slowly in the evening, staring into the fire, saying nothing. It was ritual, not indulgence, a way to face another hour without complaining. The kettle, always on or nearby, was a symbol of preparedness. The steam rising from its spout meant life continued. No matter what wasn't in the pantry, there was always water and heat. Tea turned scarcity into ceremony. It made poverty feel just a little more dignified, as if comfort could be summoned from leaves and patience alone. Some households passed tea recipes down like heirlooms, blends meant to ease stomach aches, cure fevers, or keep spirits lifted during dark days. A certain combination might remind someone of their grandmother. Another might be tied to childbirth or mourning. In these ways, tea wasn't just sustenance, it was memory, healing, connection. Even in towns, tea had presence. People gathered to sip and talk, even if the cups were mismatched and the brew bitter. It gave structure to the day, morning calm, afternoon reflection, evening rest. It filled the space between what they had and what they needed. In homes with little, tea gave the illusion of plenty, and so kettle remained a central figure in the quiet theater of daily life. Hunger might come back, louder than ever, but for a while, the tea kept it at bay. Old trick of the poor, passed between generations, a hot breath of hope in a cold, rumbling world. Asterisk, In 1850, tins were curiosity objects that belonged to the world beyond the hills. When one appeared in a village, it was like a message in a bottle from another life. Their metal surfaces shone dully, often dented from travel, their labels faded or written in foreign tongues. No one knew exactly how long the contents had been inside, but it didn't matter. A tin of peaches, sardines, or condensed milk was a treasure chest of the modern world. They arrived in odd ways, brought by a traveling salesman, traded for wool, or gifted by a relative working in the city. Children crowded around as the can opener did its slow, clumsy work, their eyes wide with wonder. The sound of punctured metal was unlike anything else in the kitchen, a hiss of pressure that carried the weight of industry, a civilization of somewhere else entirely. The contents were often exotic, peaches that glowed golden even after years, and syrup, meat that smelled smoky and strange, or thick white milk that clung to spoons like paint. Families tasted cautiously at first, then with delight. The texture, the sweetness, the salted was like discovering a new language of food. For a moment, they were no longer poor or rural. They were participants in something wider, something modern. But tins also held mystery. How were these things really made of? Were they safe? Were they sacred? Rumors spread of tinned fish that caused fevers, or peaches soaked in chemicals. Not yet. No one could deny the allure. A shelf with a tin on it felt fuller. A cupboard with a can of beans felt like a fortress, even if it sat untouched for months. Just knowing it was there brought a strange kind of comfort. Some tins were never opened at all. They were saved for a rainy day that never quite came. Like family silver or heirlooms, they represented hope of fallback plan sealed in metal. Parents told their children, "Not yet. We saved that for when things are truly bad." And so, these cans became emotional anchors, untouched but deeply important. When one was finally opened, it was a ceremony. A tin on the table changed the tone of the meal. It brought stories of a city, questions about factories and machines, talk of trains and letters and coins with other faces. A single tin could stretch a dinner into a night of conversation, imagination, and wonder. In 1850, the mysterious tins from the city were more than just food. They were fragments of another world, glimpses of progress, of danger, of indulgence, and of promise. And in a world held together by firewood and flour, they reminded everyone that something new was always just beyond the horizon. Asterisk, it started with the smell smoke drifting in under the door as the sun was setting. In 1850, barns were more than structures. They were pantries. Pantries were survival, and fire was the great destroyer. When a barn caught fire, it wasn't just animals and hay at stake. It was food for the entire winter, seed for the spring, and the slow, careful work of months reduced to ash in minutes. The family rushed out barefoot, buckets in hand, hearts pounding louder than the crackling wood. The flames lit up the sky like a false sunrise. Screams filled the air of animals, of men shouting, of mothers calling for their children to stay back. Neighbors arrived quickly, forming a line from the well to the blaze, passing buckets that steamed uselessly against the inferno. Inside, the barn had been smoked meats, dried herbs, barrels of apples, and sacks of grain. All of it was gone. The fire, merciless and bright, had taken not just the structure, but the season's safety. By dawn, the only thing left was the blackened skeleton of wood and the smell of grief soaked into the soil. A dog barked at the embers as if the blaze still lived there. Meals changed immediately. What had been planned and rationed was now forgotten. The family shifted into survival mode, less bread, more foraged greens, smaller portions, longer fasts. The barn was more than a building. It had been their shield against winter. Without it, they faced the cold like a soldier without armor. Yet from the ashes, something remarkable happened. Neighbors brought what they could: half a ham, 2 loaves of bread, extra root vegetables. Okay, it wasn't much, but it reminded the family they weren't alone. One woman brought jars of pickled eggs. Okay, a boy brought dried beans from last season. Slowly, shelves were filled again, not with what had been, but with what others gave. The meals that followed the fire were humble but holy. Every bite felt like a lifeline, every spoonful a gift. The barn had taken their security, but not their community. And in its absence, the family grew closer, more aware of how fragile and precious their routine had been. I had burned the walls, but not the hands that reached out to rebuild. Years later, the new barn stood taller. Its walls were thicker, its roof better, but the family never forgot that season. The way bread tasted after the fire, the silence of the dinner table when hunger became real, it's gonna warmth of broth given by a stranger as the snow began to fall again. Asterisk, there were nights in 1850 when dinner looked suspiciously like the meal they'd had that morning. The reason was simple: some days there just wasn't enough to prepare something new, and so breakfast was reheated, repurposed, or reinvented. A cold porridge loaf, sliced and fried. Few eggs scrambled with leftover potatoes. Bread soaked in milk and browned on a griddle, pretending to be something special. It wasn't glamour, it was survival. Hey, and oddly enough, those meals left a soft imprint on memory. Children often found joy in these moments. Breakfast for dinner felt like a trick, like bending the rules of time. It made the ordinary feel different, even if it was the same food twice in one day. They giggled at the idea of eating morning food under moonlight, pretending they were inventing something new. And in a way, they were reinventing normalcy when nothing about life was easy. Mothers turned necessity into routine. When the larder was thin, they'd announce the evening meal with cheer. How about breakfast for supper tonight? It wasn't about pretending there was plenty, it was about softening the disappointment. The simple familiarity of oats or bread at night made hunger feel less foreign. It felt like a return, a repetition that provided comfort in a life defined by uncertainty. The stove smelled like morning against steam rising from kettles, tar melting on iron pans, a sprinkle of salt over boiled grain. Even the clink of utensils against tin plates felt calmer, slower. There was something restful about these meals, as if the day itself had taken off its shoes and joined them by the fire. It was nourishment for the soul, not just the stomach. Fathers came home exhausted from fields or shops, but when they saw a bowl of porridge or warm bread, they smiled. It reminded them of simpler times, of their own childhoods, when food was sparse, but love was not. And though it lacked variety, it never lacked meaning. They ate slowly, thoughtfully, grateful for what was there, grateful for the ritual that made not enough feel like just right. Afterward, families lingered longer at the table, with no need to digest a heavy stew or cut through stringy meat. They simply sipped warm drinks and talked. Stories flowed more easily. Plans were made. Hearts settled. Sometimes, doing less was what brought people closer. And in those soft, repetitive meals, bonds were renewed with each spoonful. Not all food in 1850 came through honest means. There were whispers of a man who crossed county lines in the dead of night, carrying nothing but a wheel of forbidden cheese in a sack over his shoulder. He wasn't a criminal by trade, just a man with access to something others didn't. In an age where salt was taxed and butter was precious, keys, real aged, pungent cheese was worth its weight in gold. When he arrived, he didn't speak loudly. He waited until after sundown, and only knocked on doors where candles flickered late. He would lift a corner of cloth and show his treasure. Wedges wrapped in waxed paper, crumbling at the edges, strong enough to perfume an entire kitchen. No one asked where he got it. No one cared. Tani, they just handed over coins, bread, or even a pair of socks in exchange. The cheese was shared carefully. It wasn't thrown into a stew or hidden inside bread. Noet was sliced thin, placed on a clean plate, and passed around like a holy relic. Children wrinkled their noses at the smell, but bit into it with reverence. It melted on the tongue, salty and sharp, unlike anything they'd eaten in months. It wasn't just food, it was a reminder of a wider world. Neighbors would whisper, "He's coming again next month," and keep a candle burning longer than usual. They saved for it. They waited for it. And when they tasted it again, their eyes closed, as if trying to memorize the moment. Some said it was made from goat's milk in the far hills. Others claimed it came from across the sea. No one ever really knew. That only made it taste better. Even the smell lingered like a ghost in kitchens long after it was gone. Cheese rinds were saved, grated, or dropped into broth for flavor. Nothing was wasted. Even the wax wrap was reused to seal jars or start kindling. The smuggler never stayed long, but his presence changed everything for a few nights, reminding people that flavor, luxury, and boldness still existed even in the most modest homes. He eventually stopped coming. Perhaps he was caught. Perhaps he found new buyers, But his legend remained. Children told stories about him. Elders recalled the year he came during the snowstorm. His cheese became memory. A flavor so distinct that people swore they could still taste it in dreams. And in that cheese, they tasted freedom not just from hunger, but from sameness, from the grayness of every day. It was a slice of rebellion, creamy and fierce. Though it vanished, it was never truly gone. The farmer's market in 1850 wasn't a place of abundance, it was a place of possibility. Every trip there felt like a gamble. With the eggs be fresh or already spoiled? Would the apples have worms? Would the vendor throw in an extra carrot if you smiled right? The stalls were humble, often just blankets laid over crates, but to those who came with coins in hand and hope in their eyes, it felt like walking into a chapel of survival. Mothers arrived early, children in tow, baskets empty in expectations. Modest. The market smelled of earth onions fresh from the ground, turnips with dirt still clinging to their sides, and cabbage so sharp it bit the air. There were voices everywhere, bargaining, apologizing, insisting. It wasn't always friendly, but it was honest. A place where a woman might trade 2 eggs for a needle, or a boy could earn a potato for sweeping someone's stall. Not all vendors were equal. Some stretched the truth about freshness, turned the worst side of fruit downward, or watered down milk to stretch their supply. And yet, customers returned, because the market wasn't just a place to buy food, it was where news was shared, faces were seen, and chances were taken. Every trip was a risk, but one they couldn't afford not to take. Occasionally, someone struck luck. A basket of overly ripe peaches sold cheap at the end of the day, or a fishmonger who miscounted and threw in a second fillet. These wins were savored, They turned ordinary meals into feasts, They became stories told over the next market visit tales, of bargains, of kindness, of food that tasted better because it was unexpected. Children loved the market. Even when there was no money to buy sweets or nuts, they marveled at the colors, the smells, the noise. It was the most alive place they knew. And when they were allowed to carry something home, an onion, a lump of cheese, they felt important, like part of the solution, The market taught them resilience and sharp eyes. How to tell a good egg from a bad deal. The walk home was quiet, heavier with goods and satisfaction. What was bought might not last long, but it would last enough. Enough to make soup, enough to sweeten the porridge, enough to get through another few days. The market didn't promise plenty, it promised a fighting chance, And for most, that was enough. In a world ruled by uncertainty, the farmer's market was a roll of the dice they took with open hearts. 'Cause sometimes survival wasn't about what you brought, it was about what you dared to hope for. Asterisk. In 1850, when coins were few, barter was king. Families traded what they had for what they needed, and sometimes the most surprising deals were struck. A jar of lard for a bolt of cloth, a bar of soap for 3 apples. But one of the most prized exchanges was salt for honey, two simple elements, both essential, both powerful, and both rare enough to be precious. Salt preserved life. It kept meat from rotting, flavored the bland, and healed wounds. Honey, on the other hand, made life sweeter. It soothed sore throats, glazed bread, and made a child smile after a long, bitter winter. Trading one for the other was not about value. It was about timing, trust, and the quiet math of survival. Those who made the trade often did so with reverence. Families who kept bees were respected, almost envied. Their hives buzzed like treasure chests with wings. Honey was gathered carefully, strained through cloth, stored in dark jars like liquid sunlight. Salt, in turn, came from faraway places, traded down dusty roads and across rivers. To have both in a home was a sign of rare luck or meticulous planning. The trade itself was often done in silence. No argument, no haggling, just the weight of salt in a pouch exchanged for the slow pour of honey into a jar. It was as if the two substances understood each other, one sharp and ancient, the other soft and golden. A children watched in awe. These weren't just ingredients. They were power, stored and shared. Meals that followed such a trade were celebrated. A biscuit brushed with honey, a stew properly salted. Both humble, but elevated by the presence of something special. Even the smell of honey on warm bread or salt rubbed into fresh butter turned kitchens into temples. These flavors didn't just feed, they awakened something in the weary and the worried. Mothers used both sparingly, knowing they wouldn't come again soon. A teaspoon here, a pinch there, and yet even a little changed everything. It taught children the lesson of appreciation, that abundance could live in small spoons, and that flavor, like love, didn't need to be loud to be powerful. In those quiet trade salt for honey, families exchanged more than goods. They exchanged hope. One meal at a time. Asterisk. They said she was strange, the girl who picked wildflowers and nibbled their petals when she thought no one was watching. In 1850, food was about survival, not beauty. But for her, who had known many nights with no bread and too many with watery stew, flowers became a kind of secret rebellion. Dandelions, violets, clover, even rose petals, she learned, which were safe, which were sweet, which could trick her stomach into believing it was full. Her mother, too tired, too scolded, and too wise to judge, let her be. Perhaps she knew there was something sacred in it. The way her daughter closed her eyes when chewing a violet, as if tasting a memory of something lost. There were no cakes, no candies, but there were petals, and they bloomed where no stores could reach. Neighbors whispered, "Poor child's gone mad with hunger," they'd say, but they didn't see what the flowers gave her. Not just flavor, but fantasy. She'd make garlands, then eat them, petal by petal. She'd steep clover in hot water and sip it like tea. When other children played with sticks and stones, she played with color, scent, and sweetness from the soil. One evening, when the pantry was nearly bare, she brought in a bouquet of lavender and mint. Her mother crushed them into butter made from the last cream and spread it over hard bread. The result was magical. For once, the food smelled like a garden and tasted like sunlight. Even her father smiled a rare and precious gift. Over time, others began asking the girl which flowers were edible. She'd smile shyly, pointing to the ones that tasted like spring or made your tongue dance. Her knowledge became currency, her joy contagious. She was no longer just the girl who ate flowers. She became the girl who reminded them that beauty could be eaten, that hunger didn't always have to be ugly in winter. She dried petals and leaves, saving them in little jars marked with charcoal drawings. She'd crush marigold into cornmeal or press elderflowers into sweet cakes on feast days. Even in the coldest months, her family's meals held color, memory, and grace. The flowers became part of them, fragile, fleeting, but unforgettable. They said she was strange, but maybe she was just ahead of her time, because in a world ruled by gruel and grit, she tasted joy when no one thought to look. Asterisk bread in 1850 was never just bread, it was survival baked into a crust. But one evening, something miraculous happened. A loaf came out of the fire, oddly shaped, bulging on one side. When it cooled and was sliced, a coin tumbled out, wrapped in cloth. Gasps filled the small kitchen. Laughter came next, then disbelief, then joy. It was like finding treasure inside a stone. The coin had been tucked inside, accidentally, perhaps intentionally, by a grandmother wanting to bless the meal. No one could say for sure, but its presence changed everything. The bread, already precious, became sacred. Each slice seemed warmer, each bite sweeter. It wasn't the coin's value, it was the message it carried. Sometimes life hides blessings in the plainest places. They didn't spend the coin that night, okay? Left it on the mantle, turning it over in the candlelight, okay? It became a conversation, peace, a prayer token, a symbol. For days afterward, the children peeked inside every loaf, hoping for more magic. Even when there wasn't, they still chewed slower, looked closer. The bread had changed them not in taste, but in trust. Other families began telling stories. There was a loaf once with a thimble inside. My uncle swears he bit into one with a tiny spoon from the old country. Real or not, these tales wove together fantasy and hope, okay? They made the kitchen feel enchanted, like the hearth was, a doorway to surprises waiting in flour and fire. The next week, the mother quietly wrapped a dried flower into the dough. Her daughter found it and squealed with delight. Spread blossom, she called it. From then on, every now and then, something small would be hidden inside a ribbon, a note, a polished stone. Not because they were valuable, but because they reminded the family that meals could carry stories, that food could carry joy. Even guests came to hope for a surprise loaf. Not every meal had one, but the possibility lingered, warming the room like a second fire. It made people smile before they even sat down. It turned eating into anticipation, chewing into celebration. In a world where bread was often dry and days were often harder, the surprise inside the loaf taught them that wonder didn't need wealth. It only needed a little imagination and someone willing to tuck magic into the mundane. Asterisk. The corn was supposed to last through winter. Rows and rows of golden kernels, dried and shelled, had been stored with care in barrels lined with cloth. But in 1850, the rains were strange. They came too late, then stayed too long, and when the corn was harvested, it was thin, mildewed, and bitter. The yield was half what it should have been. The air in the barn felt hollow. Families tried to salvage what they could. They sorted moldy from merely stale, scraped mildew from cobs, and boiled everything longer. But meals lost their color. Cornbread turned gray. Porridge had a sour edge. Children frowned at the taste, but ate anyway. They had no choice. Hunger doesn't negotiate with flavor, just waits. Soon, bellies ached more often. People grew tired faster. The corn was filling, but not nourishing. Some ground it into meal and mixed it with whatever flour remained. Others tried to ferment it into sour mash for trading. But no one said it out loud. Everyone knew the truth. The corn had failed them, and with it, a part of their peace. Neighbors began to trade more fiercely. Beans for bread, eggs for dried apples. Desperation walked through the streets disguised. As barter, everyone was still polite. But beneath the surface, fear crept in. Because if corn, the staple of their diet, couldn't be trusted, what else might betray them? Mothers turned to old recipes, things their grandmothers had cooked during bad years. Nettles, ground acorns, boiled bark tea. It wasn't pretty, but it was something. Children were told it was pioneer food, spun as adventure rather than desperation. And in that way, hardship was made edible, swallowed through stories. When spring finally came and the earth opened once more, the first new shoots were planted with solemnity. No one took corn for granted again, not its sweetness, not its abundance, and not its silence in the barrels. They had learned that even the most dependable food could vanish. And so they cherished it more deeply than ever before. The year the cornfield was remembered not only for its hunger, but for the resilience it awakened. They survived it, barely, but they did, and every ear that grew the next season felt like forgiveness. Asterisk, it was supposed to be a simple loaf, like every other. But on one quiet night, with the fire just right and the yeast finally alive, the dough rose taller than anyone expected, spilled over the edge of the bowl, puffed like a balloon, and baked into a dome so magnificent that the entire family stared at it in awe. It was a miracle, golden, warm, absurdly large. Children clapped. The mother laughed. Even the father grinned. "We'll never eat all that," someone said. But they did. Every crumb. The crust crackled like leaves. The inside steamed like clouds. And for once, no one argued over the last piece. There was enough, more than enough. The bread, somehow, had grown with them. They told everyone. It rose on its own, they said, like it knew we needed it. Some neighbors nodded, some smirked, but everyone asked for a slice. The mother gave pieces away, wrapped in cloth. The house smelled like comfort for days. And though the ingredients were the same as always, the memory of that loaf felt sacred. That night, they didn't eat it with stew. They ate it alone, buttered or plain. Each bite was slow, reverent. It was more than food. It was proof that something ordinary could become extraordinary. That flour, salt, and water could surprise you, that even in repetition, magic might still be waiting. The mother tried to replicate it later, but the loaf never rose like that again. Not quite. The fire was too hot, or the yeast too tired. And yet, she didn't mind, because that night had been a gift. Something unasked for, unearned, and unforgettable. The family spoke of it like a holiday. Remember the bread that arose, too high, they'd say, and eyes would soften. Years later, when times grew hard again, the story returned. It might rise again, someone would whisper, and that was enough. Enough to keep baking, enough to keep believing. Sometimes, food isn't about what's on the plate. It's about what it reminds us is still possible. It was bound to happen eventually. A gust of wind, a distracted hand, a pot left uncovered too long near the fire. That night, when the soup was ladled into bowls, it carried with it a bitterness no one could ignore. Tiny flecks of soot floated on the surface, and the smoky sting clung to every sip. The youngest child cried, convinced the soup was ruined. The mother sighed and set her spoon down with quiet defeat. In 1850, meals couldn't be discarded just because they went wrong. There was no second pot, no extra carrots, no time to start again. The soup was eaten slowly, reluctantly, with small sips and careful bites. It burned slightly on the tongue, not from spice, but from sorrow. Every bite carried the frustration of knowing that hard work had turned bitter with just a moment's error. But then the father cleared his throat and said, "Tastes like a campfire, like the night we got lost in the woods and boiled roots by moonlight." The room paused, then a laugh, then another. And just like that, the story of the night we ate ashes was born. It would be told again and again, exaggerated over time, becoming funnier each winter. The children began calling it fire stew, pretending it gave them superpowers. The mother began sprinkling extra herbs to cover the flavor, and the next time a little ash found its way in, no one blinked. Mistakes in the kitchen became part of the lore of the home, part of the recipe, not flaws, but flavors of life. It taught them that even burned meals could nourish, that not every error had to be erased, that sometimes what ruined a dish gave it identity. Food didn't have to be perfect, it had to be present, it had to be shared. That was enough. A tin, that home, where pots were scratched and spoons dented. Little ash wasn't the worst thing to taste. Over time, the story spread. Visitors came to expect the smoky soup and were told the tale with theatrical flair. It became a ritual of laughter, a symbol of resilience, proof that even mistakes could become memories worth savoring. And so, in that home, ashes in the soup became not a tragedy, but a reminder that every meal held the power to carry warmth, even when it didn't taste the way they hoped. Asterisk, the day was gray, the wind sharp, and the boy was nearly gone. Pale from fever, silent from pain, he had refused food for days. His mother's hands trembled as she stirred a pot with little more than broth, barley, and a few soft vegetables. She whispered prayers with each turn, begging the food to carry something stronger than flavor, hope, strength, life. No one spoke much that evening. The bowl was set before the boy gently, with a spoon carved by his grandfather. The smell was faint, but comforting like rain on dry earth. His eyes barely opened, but his lips parted just once. One slow spoonful, then another, and with each one, something changed. Color returned, breath deepened. The silence in the room cracked, just a little dot. It wasn't a miracle potion. It wasn't rich or exotic. It was a meal made from scraps ends of carrots, leftover barley, broth simmered down from bones used twice already. But it was made with love so pure and intention so deep that it carried weight beyond its ingredients. The boy, though still fragile, opened his eyes the next morning and asked, barely above a whisper, "Is there more soup?" The answer was yes, because that night, when he had taken those spoonfuls, his family had taken a breath they hadn't realized they were holding. It was as if the whole house had been stitched back together. And while the illness hadn't left completely, something worse had to spare. They saved the recipe, if it could be called that, a page with vague notes. Small barley, soft vegetables, broth stirred gently, never rushed. But really, it was the care, the hope, the desperation turned into devotion that gave it power. Every time someone fell ill after that, they made the same soup. They called it the meal that saved him. It became part of the family's soul. Neighbors asked for it. Elders said it reminded them of wartime. Children said it tasted like being held. And even when times grew better, they still made it now and then, not out of necessity, but out of remembrance of the nightlife returned in a spoon, of what it meant to feed someone, not just to survive, but to heal. Because in 1850, and maybe always, food was never just food. It was medicine, memory, and miracle if made with enough heart. Hey, and sometimes all it took was one warm bowl to bring someone back from the edge. A meal that saved a life. Asterisk.